Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special edition of New Scientist Weekly, coming to you live from the Science Museum in London. Give it up. Let's give it. Yay! What we want to do in the show today is furnish you with some good cheer to get you through the next couple of weeks, really, with your families. That's the wrong way of putting it, isn't it? To see you through the joy that is the festive period, and to give you some good cheer to take you into the new year. I'm your host for the evening. I'm Rowan Hooper. I'm the host of the New Scientist Weekly podcast. Let's meet our panel tonight. We've got Kat Delange. She's the editor of New Scientist. We've got Madeline Cuff, a reporter, and Sam Wong, who's a news editor. So welcome, everyone. So what we're going to do, we're going to discuss our favourite stories of the year. We're going to talk about our cultural science highlights of the year. And then we're going to give you these things to impress your friends and family with over the festive period. But let's start with a mini review of the year. So I wanted to ask the panel what their favourite stories are. It might be their most memorable one, the funniest one, whatever sticks out to them. So I'm going to let you go first, Sam. Off you go.
Okay, so my story is about what happens to our brains after we die.
Yeah, very cheery one to start us with. Yeah.
So as everyone knows, normally the soft tissue decomposes and liquefies pretty quickly, so you're left with a skeleton after just a few years. But it turns out that occasionally archaeologists find bodies that are hundreds or thousands of years old with the brains still intact.
Wow. Grim.
Yeah, it's amazing. So earlier this year, Alexandra Morton Hayward at Oxford published a study where she looked at all of the published reports of preserved brains, so more than 4,000 cases. And in some cases, they could explain the brain had been preserved because of known processes like freeze drying or tanning. So when you find bodies in bogs, they've been preserved by a process a bit like leather making. But there were 1,300 cases where the brain had been preserved where all of the other soft tissue had decomposed. So there was no skin, no muscle, just a brain rattling around in a skull.
So a brain like a pea in a pod, just knocking around.
Yes, pretty much. So one example was St. Hedwig of Silesia, who died in 1243. Her body was dug up in the 17th century and her brain was found to be preserved, and they attributed this to divine power, obviously.
Okay. And we are new scientists. We're in the Science Museum, so we're not going to attribute it to divine power. What can we attribute it to, Sam?
Well, it's a bit of a mystery, but Morton Hayward has a working hypothesis, which is that maybe in certain circumstances, substances like iron can catalyze these kind of cross-links between proteins and lipids, and they make them form stable molecules that resist degradation. So the mechanisms for this might actually have similarities with what happens in the brain in certain neurodegenerative diseases like dementia. So she thinks that if we can figure out what's happening in these preserved brains, we might even be able to shed some light on what's happening in brain aging as well.
And so you said 1,300 they found. Does that suggest it might be quite common?
Yeah, well, more common than we thought, but we don't really know how common it is, because one of the problems is that the preserved brains tend to be the same color as soil. So if you're not expecting to find a brain in the skull, you might not notice it's there.
Wash it out. Washing this really valuable material away.
Yeah. So it might be more common than we thought, but it's exciting that these studies are bringing this to light so that we can look out for more of these preserved brains.
Nice. All right, let's go to Kat. Can you match something as visceral as that? Or
I don't know. No, probably not. That's a hard act to follow. No, the story that I've picked for this year is actually, funnily enough, probably a story that I would have picked and maybe did pick last year, which is Ozempic. So these weight loss drugs that originally were developed for diabetes, and then we did stories last year and even the year before about how they've been shown to cause weight loss, and so there have been trials using them to see if they work for obesity, which they do. But the reason why I've picked it for this year is I just feel like this is the year that these drugs have really entered into the public consciousness. I read in New Scientist recently that 25,000 people a week start using these drugs in the US at the moment. I was at my hairdresser's the other week, and this
very nice job, by the way.
Thank you. This guy, my hairdresser, he's young and fit and healthy, and goes to the gym, and doesn't need to lose any weight. And he was saying that he buys it online and kind of micro doses Ozempic. And so, I feel like this is a story that has evolved this year. And also what we've started to report is that these drugs seem to be effective not just for diabetes and weight loss, but also all sorts of other things like fertility, depression, heart health, addiction, Alzheimer's disease. So there's this idea that actually they're having a more profound effect on the body and the brain. And I think that's a story that's going to carry on next year. And it sort of poses a lot of questions about, are we going to get to a place where people are taking these drugs like, aspirin? So I think it's a big story.
And it all seems to be linked with inflammation, doesn't it? Which, as we know, is linked to so many different things. And what I found interesting this year, where it's really broken through, as you say, is the way it seems to affect the brain and behaviour of people who are taking it. And that's something really, at first I might have thought, it's just some sort of physiological thing to do with weight loss, but it really affects the brain and behaviour. And that's really fascinating.
It does. And also, if you think about the fact that it works for addiction, it seems to numb people's desires for other things other than food. But then also the flip side is, with exercise, maybe some people don't feel like they want to exercise so much anymore. So there is a flip side to that. I should also say that I don't endorse what my hairdresser does. And I'm not saying that anybody should be going online buying these drugs and microdosing them. On a more serious note, we don't know. We haven't got long-term studies into what they do, and so it's a sort of watch and wait situation. But I think it's really interesting. And I was talking to Helen Thompson, who reported this story for us about how they work for all sorts of different things, and she was saying, what if they do work for all these other conditions, and then people are like, well, you're going to lose loads of weight, but would that be the worst side effect? I mean, we know how easy it is to put on weight. If somebody said to you, well, the side effect is you're going to lose a lot of weight, so you're going to have to eat a bit more. Like
if it's working with something like Alzheimer's or something,
it wouldn't necessarily be such a big problem. So maybe we need a bit of a mindset shift. But it's a watch and wait situation. But I think it's a story that's going to carry on.
Yeah, it's been a huge story this year. Maddie, what stood out for you this year?
So I am the climate person at New Scientist, but I'm under strict instructions tonight to be cheery and not too gloomy. So you can check out newscientist.com over the Christmas period to read all of our quite depressing climate news from this year. So we've got everything on the breaching of 1.5 degrees, the record temperatures that we've been seeing over the last couple of years, the weakening of the AMOC. So you can have a really fun, festive reading session over the Christmas break. But I think today I'm going to pick something slightly more left field. There was a really fascinating story from earlier this year on the discovery that metallic nodules that are found on the seafloor are actually a source of oxygen for the deep sea. Yeah,
so these are the nodules that have manganese and cobalt, nickel, things like that people want to make batteries, to put in wind turbines and power the green revolution, right? So there is a lot of excitement over them.
Yeah, there's already a lot of interest, like you say. These nodules, they're about the size of a potato, and they're found on these areas of the seabed called abyssal plains in the deep sea. And there's been a lot of interest from deep sea mining companies to essentially pick these nodules up and use them as sources of these critical materials. And as part of that, there's been quite a lot of research around these nodules and their role in the ecosystem. So the story starts back in 2013. A British scientist called Andrew Sweetman noticed that something was a bit strange while he was doing some research in this zone of the Pacific Ocean called the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, where you'll find lots of these nodules. And his team was sending machines down to the seafloor to effectively seal off a bit of the seabed with nodules on them and measure the oxygen flux. And if you're in an area of the deep sea where there's no plant life and no kind of visible signs of photosynthesis, you'd expect the oxygen flux to go down, right, if you sealed off a part of the sea and the seabed. But instead they saw the oxygen levels rising. And essentially, I love this bit of the story. Sweetman ignored the findings for 8 years because he thought, well, I must be doing something wrong. I'll just forget about it. And then he was back on another research cruise in 2021 and did a version of the same experiment and got the same results, which kind of made him think there might be something in this. So he and his colleagues, essentially their theory is that these nodules are kind of joining together and somehow there's an electric current running through them and they're acting as geobatteries under the water that are splitting the seawater into hydrogen and oxygen.
So geobatteries.
Crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it must be the absolute last thing that people want, the mining companies wanted to find, because they're basically already up against it, because you can't collect these things without dredging the seafloor and wrecking the ecology. And now you might be removing a source of oxygen as well. So not great for that from that point of view.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of additional research that needs to be done. There's loads of unanswered questions, not least where the electrical current is coming from to kind of kickstart this process. So it's kind of the start of a finding, but it definitely, I think, will put the brakes on the decision on whether or not to allow these nodules to be dredged up from the ocean. And my favourite detail of this story is that the research cruise that Sweetman was on when he made this discovery was being funded by a deep sea mining company, which are now not very happy about the results.
Suddenly challenging and wishing they hadn't funded it, I guess. Okay, thanks, Maddie. Now, my turn. As you're saying, there has been a lot of scary news this year. So I wanted to go really otherworldly for my story. And it's a story that we did in May that was a survey of millions of stars in our galaxy. And they detected a kind of infrared heat coming from them, a strange kind of infrared heat coming from some of the stars. And can you guess what it might be?
Is it not just the heat from the stars burning fuel?
Well, no, because it's apparently it's the wrong kind of heat. It's like the wrong kind of leaves on the track or something. It's not the normal heat you would get from a star. So it could potentially be like protoplanetary dust that's obscuring the star that you get in early star systems, but these stars are too old for that, so that should have all settled down. Another alternative is that the stars that are giving off this infrared might be coincidentally in front of a galaxy far away that's also emitting infrared. But then that's not why I've got them in the story. Another explanation, this is put forward by the astronomers, is that it's a Dyson sphere, which is essentially a gigantic shell constructed around the star by super advanced alien civilizations that are harnessing the power of their local star.
What would that be made of? What material would the shell be made of? Do we know? Is it a...
You'll have to ask the advanced aliens. I'll defer that one
next time
to them. But yeah, so the suggestion is that this infrared spike that they're seeing is a technosignature, which is like when we have a biosignature, it's a sign of life. A technosignature is astronomers' sign of some advanced technology, far out there.
Is a Dyson sphere a kind of advanced vacuum cleaner? What does it actually do?
It's not James Dyson. It's named after Freeman Dyson, a physicist who had loads of amazing ideas. And one of them was the idea that in the far future, advanced civilizations might harness their stars like this. And in fact, actually, this might be a Dyson swarm, which is when you don't completely cover the star in a shell, but you just have millions of satellites orbiting the star and collecting information collecting energy from it. And they're about 900 light years away, the nearest ones. So, still quite far in terms of we can't visit them at all. But what I like about this story is I think it gives us some sort of hope that we've escaped what's called the Great Filter.
Is this a vacuum filter that Dyson has made?
It is not another Dyson thing. It's so there's this thing called Fermi's paradox, and that's the idea that there are millions of planets out there that probably contain life, and a certain amount of them will have intelligent life. There must be so many of them. The paradox is, why haven't we seen them yet? And one resolution to the paradox is the filter, which is something that's so hard for a civilization to pass, it effectively filters you out. So that in fact, advanced civilizations would be vanishingly rare in the universe. For example, climate change might be such a filter for us. I'm taking on the Doom Merchant role in this point. But what's hopeful about this story is that if they are Dyson Spheres, then a decent amount of civilizations have managed to get past this filter. So there you go. That's my bit of good cheer. All right, let's do some cultural highlights. So I wanted to talk about things that we've seen or done or read over the year to share with our audience that that have just tickled us or touched us in some way. And I just wanted to show this thing. This is an installation I saw in London called Breathing with the Forest, and it's a LiDAR scan of a patch of rainforest in Colombia. And what the collective here, it's the Marshmallow Laser Feast collective, and they do fantastic stuff. And they've done these high resolution scans, and then they've animated all the connections in the ecosystem, and it makes this really beautiful sort of immersive experience of the ecology and the symbiosis in the forest, and it's just a really beautiful thing.
What are the white floaty things?
They're forest sprites. No, I don't know what they are. Yeah, probably just vapor or something. Yeah, we'll probably cut this bit from the actual podcast so that I don't sound like I don't know what it is. It's art, Sam. It's art. I also want to mention a book of the year, which is my book of the year is called Juice by Tim Winton, Australian writer. It's a post-climate crisis book set in Western Australia. That doesn't make it perhaps so compelling, but what I found incredible about it was the sort of central point is what future generations are going to do to take revenge against people who didn't do enough about the climate crisis. And I interviewed a climate philosopher a couple of years ago called Andreas Malm, who wrote a book called How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which has been really influential. And I feel that this novel has taken that idea and just run with it. And it's just a fantastic apocalyptic story. Kat, over to you.
Yeah, I'm finding this a difficult question, the culture one, because I'm feeling a bit uncultured this year. Last year, I was very much into the New Scientist book club. I can highly recommend it if you don't, or if you're not already a member. And I've read a lot less this year, but I have watched a lot of TV. So I don't know if any of you have seen Supercell, which is a sort of superhero. It's kind of 5 ordinary people in South London who discover that they have these superpowers, and it's got this biological, I don't want to give too much away, but there's a biological explanation. So
it's all connected to sickle cell disease. So
give it away then.
Well, it doesn't give it that much away, but they're all black, and so the superpowers are all connected somehow to sickle cell disease. So there's this. It's not just a superhero show. It's got this extra level of...
It's like social commentary, a bit of science. It's set in London. And the characters are really compelling. So, yeah, I really enjoyed that. I wouldn't normally go for sort of superhero stuff, but I really enjoyed that. It's really the characters and the story. And then I also have a book, which is The Other Valley by Scott Alexander Howard, and this is a sort of sci-fi time travel novel, which is about this town in a valley. But if you travel, let me get this right. So, if you travel to the east, you go 20 years forward in time, and if you travel to the west, you go 20 years back in time. And so, people aren't allowed to leave for obvious reasons, because it'd be quite problematic if you went and visited yourself or your
future self. Yeah.
But obviously, people try, and so again, this is a story that, do you worry that it's realistic or that there's a good explanation for this ability to travel through time? No, because the characters are brilliant. It's got so much heart. It's a real page turner. So I would recommend that.
I totally endorse both of those, and The Other Valley is a lovely story, as you say. Sam, what about you?
Last week I went to see the stage show of Dr Strangelove, which is on in the West End at the moment. It's been adapted from the film by Armando Iannucci and Sean Foley, with Steve Coogan playing the lead role, or he's actually playing 4 roles in it, which is one more than Peter Sellers played in the film. But it was really funny, really great. The story feels, I thought, a bit less far-fetched than it did when I first saw the film, because the times we live in. So it feels kind of relevant to these times. And the humor is quite absurdist, but it never becomes completely farcical. So I thought that was great. And
sounds like Coogan's the perfect character.
Yeah, he's perfect for that. And yeah, he juggles these multiple roles, and he has to switch his character very quickly. But he's really funny in it.
Maddie, what's on your
picking
radar?
up everybody else's culture
Yeah.
tips. I'm actually going to see Dr Strangelove in January, so I'm happy to hear Sam's glowing review. I'm cheating a little bit because my social life has been slightly curtailed by a baby this year, so I haven't had a huge amount of opportunity to get out and absorb the culture. But I'm really looking forward to seeing, there's a film called Rumours that's out in cinemas now, and it's like a absurdist comedy about what would happen if you had a bunch of G7 leaders that get lost in the woods during a meeting, and they're trying to create this treaty that addresses a global crisis, but they're also being chased by zombies around the woods. So that, I think that sounds like quite a good one to watch over Christmas. And in a similar vein, there's a little bit of a pattern repeating itself here, but I really enjoyed The Substance, which is kind of a feminist horror with Demi Moore starring as an aging celebrity who does exercise videos. And she decides to take this kind of pioneering new substance and inject it in her. And then she gives birth to a new, younger version of herself that's got the same DNA as her. I mean, it's quite spurious science, but it's quite fun. It doesn't end well for anybody in the film. But it's quite nice to see Hollywood trying to tackle some of its, I guess, aggression of modern beauty standards in a kind of interesting and inventive way. So, but it is quite graphic, especially towards the end, so don't watch it with young children.
Okay, great. Look, loads of good culture there to catch up on. Right, now we're in round 3, and this is our quiz round for you, okay? And I'm going to pass over to Sam, who's our quiz master. Sam.
Okay, so got some questions. First of all, some questions about food and drink, which is one of my favourite topics at any time of year. And hopefully you've had some mulled wine earlier. So the first question is, true or false? Warm drinks taste more alcoholic than cold ones. Put your hand up if you think that's true. A few hands, yeah. And what about false? Oh, fairly even, I think. So it's true. And there was a study this year that found that people did perceive this, but also that there's a reason for it, which is something to do with how surface tension makes water and ethanol molecules cluster together. So that was quite cool.
Does it change how drunk you get?
It doesn't change how drunk you get, unfortunately, no.
Asking for a friend.
The next one, what can be added to milk to initiate the yogurt making fermentation process? Anyone want to shout out if you think you know? Lemon juice, yeah, that's good. That will start to coagulate things. Any animals that might help you with this? Does anyone know? Ants, apparently. This is a traditional way of making yogurt in some places in Eastern Europe. You just drop a few ants in a glass of milk and it turns into yogurt in a few days.
I'm sure we had ants make yogurt as a cover line.
I
on the
want
magazine.
to actually try that.
Yeah, so
You get crunchy yogurt at the end.
I don't know what happens to the ants,
Protein.
but yeah, I guess so. There'll be
They do
some extra
serve
protein
ants
in
in
there.
some high-end restaurants, don't they?
Yeah. So this some researchers looked into how it works, and the ants produce formic acid, which acts in a similar way to lemon juice to coagulate things, and they also carry some of the same lactic acid producing bacteria that you find in fermented foods.
But the yogurt's not vegetarian then.
The yogurt is not a vegetarian, though.
Is that the next bubble tea?
Okay, next one. A study in October proposed a new kind of food for astronauts on long space missions, and the researchers made a product that looked like a caramel milkshake, they said, and they described it as an almost perfect food. What was it made from? Any guesses? Tofu? Not tofu.
Good guess.
Something that would be available in space.
Junk satellites. I don't know.
Oh, it's going to be some sort of disgusting human waste, isn't it, from the astronauts?
Dyson Spheres.
It's actually not that disgusting. It's asteroids that have been broken down by bacteria.
Wow.
Wow.
Yes, they kind of. I think they first sort of burn the asteroids in a kind of pyrolysis
Toasted
process,
nicely.
and then they feed the products to bacteria, and they produce something that's sort of roughly a third protein, a third fat,
This
and a third
catching on.
carbohydrate.
Yeah.
Okay, and another new foodstuff that was created this year by researchers in South Korea. They called it a new complete meal. What was it made from? Insects? Not this one. Fungi? No. So it's actually a hybrid of plants and animals. It's a kind of rice-beef hybrid. It's rice with cow muscle cells growing inside the rice grains.
That's not something I'd be rushing to try, to be honest.
They say that this is, a source of protein that's more environmentally friendly than...
Does it taste like rice or beef?
It tastes like beefy
with
rice.
Okay.
I haven't tried it myself, but I could give it a go. Okay, some questions on animals now. Pigs are less aggressive if their barn is sprayed with what scent?
Chanel.
Chanel.
The 5.
Yeah.
That's not it. I don't know if they tried that one.
No one got funding for that one. funnily enough.
Surely Chanel would fund that. No, it was lavender. Lavender oil. They sprayed it into the pig's barn, and they saw less aggressive behaviour, less tail biting, and the pig spent more time lying down. So maybe this is worth a try if you've got relatives coming over Christmas.
Your children.
Calm people down. Which animal seems to stop aging according to its epigenetic clock 1/3 of the way through its lifespan?
Oh, I was going to say
Rat is a good guess. It was not the mole rat.
axolotl.
It is the axolotl. Yes, axolotls, they're sort of salamander, and in most animals you can measure DNA methylation, these changes to the DNA. It tells you roughly how old they are, but in axolotls, it remains stable after 4 years, even though they live for 3 times that long. And they show very few signs of aging at all, so it's, they can regrow amputated limbs and things, so they're really cool. Okay, another animal one. Which animals can drink an 80% alcohol solution without getting drunk?
My French grandmother.
I was going to say a journalist on Deadline.
No? Any guesses from the audience? An insect? The oriental hornet. So they eat a lot of fruit, which sometimes has become a bit alcoholic, but they seem to have evolved the ability to drink huge quantities of alcohol without getting intoxicated. Even if you give them spirits that are 4 times stronger than anything found in nature, they just don't get drunk. And one reason it may be is they have these extra copies of a gene that produces NADP+, which is a thing that breaks down alcohol. So, that's something we can...
Handy.
Hopefully learn from again. And finally, which animal can survive with almost no sleep?
Journalist on Deadline.
It's the Mexican tetrafish, particularly these blind fish that live in caves. So the tetrafish, some of them live out in the light in rivers and things, and they sleep for 3 to 6 hours a day. But the cave fish, in the ones that live in the dark, they hardly sleep at all. And we don't know why that is, but this trait seems to have evolved separately in several groups of cave fish. So there must be a good reason for it.
Okay. Just cave fish, not sea fish.
No, just the cave ones.
All right. I wasn't really keeping count, but I think the audience scored nothing, actually. Please work harder next time. Thank you, Sam. That's brilliant. All right, this is the round where we're going to give you some gifts to take, not physical gifts, but give you something to take away on your holidays and wow your friends and family with. So, yeah, this is our gift to you. We have something called the pub test at New Scientist, and basically that is if a story is good enough that you tell it down the pub,
your friends would enjoy it,
and it passes the pub test. So we often ask, does this pass the pub test? And if it doesn't, we won't run it. So this is a version of that here. Okay, so I'll go first. Both of my stories, we're going to give you a wow story and then something to cheer you for 2025. And both of mine are to do with flowers. The first is about a farm here in Alabama, and the soil here is very rich in nickel. And the flowers that grow there, they sequester the nickel. And if you dry the flowers, you can harvest the metal from them, and you can get about 2% of the dry weight is metal. So we were just talking about trashing the ocean floor for nodules, but how about growing flowers instead of mining? So that's a nice little story.
Such a lovely little factory to have.
Yeah,
flower factory.
Nice factory to work in down the pit. Down the flower meadow. Yeah. I mean, you do need to harvest a lot of them because only 2% But I think there is potential here. Perhaps it can detoxify land as well that's got heavy metal pollution on it, and you get your metals out at the same time. And my point of good cheer is about orchids. So I've got really into orchids this year and symbiosis. And I did this story in May that showed that orchids, so this species of orchid, it often grows in clusters. It's a common purple spotted orchid. And it often grows in clusters. No one really knew why. And also the young plants around it have no chlorophyll when they're young. So they just can't make their own food through photosynthesis. So somehow the young plants are receiving food from somewhere, but no one quite could work it out why. But a team at Sheffield this year did a very clever experiment by which they basically fed the central plant radio-labeled carbon dioxide, and then they could follow what happened to that CO2 because it was basically glowing. They could follow where it went, and they worked out that it goes through the mycorrhizal network, the fungal network underground, and it feeds these young orchid plantlings around it. So I like that because we're so often taught that life in the wild is competitive and red in tooth and claw, and this is just a lovely example of how cooperation with another individual can be beneficial to them. So it's a nice example of the mother orchid sharing its resources. That's my point of good cheer over Christmas. Kat, got a wow factor for you.
My wow story from this year was this incredible story about sort of the line between life and death. And it's looking at these experiments that try and sort of reperfuse the brain and other organs. So when somebody has sort of cardiac arrest or another sort of assault, the brain is starved of oxygen and then can be severely damaged even if the person survives. And what we're realizing is that it's not actually the lack of oxygen so much that's causing this damage, but it's when the oxygen suddenly rushes back that is damaging. And one of the researchers said it's a bit like if you break your leg, nobody expects you to start walking on it again straight away. It needs to recover. Well, actually, organs need to recover from that lack of oxygen. And so what they're doing is they've developed these kind of cocktails of chemicals that bathe the brain and other organs and kind of prepare them to then. And
they've done it as well, haven't they? It's sort of they've done it on pig brains and even on human brains, which are sedated, so there's no danger of there being any conscious process. But they've shown
pig brains, they were sort of they were they were not
attached.
No, but they were like dead brains,
Yeah.
and they did this, and they actually kind of trace signatures.
Yeah.
But I think the sort of most interesting thing to me is with other organs, and so there have been some really interesting studies where they've managed to resuscitate a lot more people who have had a cardiac arrest and been taken to hospital by using some of these methods, and they have a much better survival rate, which is really interesting. And a fact that I learned from this story as well was that, there's actually a very long history of not successfully being able to tell whether someone is dead. And, because all of this is about, actually, can we extend the period where, we sort of have a cutoff for when someone's dead? Well, actually, maybe death is just our definition of death based on modern medicine, and we could push that. But back in the day, they used to bury people in their coffins with a bell, so that if they'd made a mistake and the person was still alive, they could ring the bell and they would let them out. And that's where Saved by the Bell comes from. And I didn't know that, but I thought that was an amazing story.
That's a good one to use around the Christmas dinner table.
Yeah. Maybe not the severed.
Yeah,
skip
the pig brains.
Okay, so have you got some good cheer for us?
I do. It's a bit rude. There will be some swearing.
Grown-ups, it's okay.
So, I don't know. I hope there's no small children in the audience if you're listening to the podcast and you do have small children, and you might want to cover their ears. But this was from our sort of holiday issue that we just that's out on the newsstand now. And it's about linguistic fossils, and it's the idea that very early in the evolution of language, our ancestors started to put together sort of 2-word phrases. So these would be a noun and a verb. So it's things like skinflint, lily-livered, busybody, but also things like shithead or
Arslicker was what
Arslicker.
you told me
Yeah,
earlier.
that was one of my favourite ones. And so interestingly, these phrases exist in a lot of other languages. There's some Serbian ones that are quite good. I'm not going to try and pronounce them in Serbian, but there's one which translates as sing dick, which means a womanizer. Another one which translates as fuckwind, which means a charlatan. And I just think there's something so sort of like funny and derogatory about these phrases. And so the idea is that we know that in human evolution, there was this period that we sort of call self-domestication. So we had survival of the fittest, and then there was a selection pressure for sort of less aggression. And so, this is called the sort of survival of the friendliest idea. But if you're less
saying
aggressive,
arslicker and
well, that's not so friendly, but exactly. So instead of aggression, this was a sort of another way of getting like social status and kind of that kudos. And so actually maybe you did become more successful and more desirable, and you passed on your genes if you were good at these kind of linguistic put downs, which I think is great.
Some of the examples of these from ancient texts, ancient languages like Mesopotamian, have we found like the oldest example of this?
No, yeah. So we don't have sort of like cuneiform tablets like sing dick kind of branded into them. But
someone should go and look.
We don't have the fossil evidence of this, but so it's more, it's more clues in. So for instance, non-human primates have some capacity to do this. So Coco the gorilla once described a stale bun as a cookie rock, which has a kind of like humour to it. And there's also evidence about kind of men using more of this sort of language when there are sort of potential mates around. So it's not, it's not hard evidence kind of written into tablets and that sort of thing. But I really like this story, and yeah, it's a point of good cheer because it's a way of kind of asserting your dominance without violence. So,
Okay, we'll take that. Maddie, what's your wow factor?
Yeah, so my wow factor is that a couple of months ago, the world's largest coral reef was discovered off the coast of the Solomon Islands in the Pacific Ocean. And I love this story because the team of divers who were out there to look at coral reefs were kind of bobbing around on the boat deciding where they were going to dive, and saw a big shape under the water and thought, well, that's a shipwreck. We'll just go down and have a closer look at the shipwreck, see if anything is going on. But it turned out that it was a giant Pavona clavus coral, which measured 34 metres by 32 metres, which is bigger than a blue whale. And they think that this coral is the largest of its kind anywhere in the world. It's probably about 300 years old. And the really good news is that despite rising water temperatures, it still appears to be in good health. So it's a good news story all round.
It does look amazing.
Yeah, and it's all, it's got about, I think, 1 billion genetically identical little polyps. So it's a large coral colony. So all of this that you see is all genetically identical, which is
so is that
very
because
cool.
of its size that it survived so well, or what? Do you know why?
They think that it might be that this coral species can withstand higher water temperatures better than some of the more delicate ones. I don't think there's any research to suggest like that its size makes it more resilient. But for now, at least, it seems to be doing just fine, which is really good.
Okay, and that's the wow story. So what about the point of good cheer?
Yeah, mine slightly speculative because it hasn't happened yet, but I'm crossing my fingers and toes that it will happen this year, and it's that China's carbon emissions might peak this year. So we don't have all the data yet, obviously, because we're still in 2024, but the latest assessment from the global carbon budget in November suggested that China's emissions would rise by about 0.2% this year, which is within the margin of error that it could be a tiny rise or a tiny fall. So, I mean, obviously we shouldn't count our chickens yet, and there's a lot to do in China's decarbonisation path. But as the world's largest emitter, if 2024 really is the first year where that emissions curve starts to bend, that's probably very good news for the rest of us on this planet.
I feel like we maybe ought to stop there in case Sam drags us down after that heartwarming story.
What do you mean?
Sam, what is your wow story?
Well, I was amazed by this story this year about comb jellies, which are sea creatures. They're not actually jellyfish, but they're a very primitive kind of animal. They don't have a brain, but they have a nervous system, which is like a net of neurons. And this year, Keiji Okura at the University of Exeter, he did a study. He was doing some experiments with these. He noticed an individual that was unusually large, and it had 2 rear ends and 2 sensory organs called apical organs, and it just looked a bit weird, like two individuals had joined together. So he tried cutting off parts of comb jellies and putting them together, and in 9 out of 10 cases, they just fused together and became one in the space of a few hours. So it's amazing that they can do this. Like, if most animals tried this, then the immune system would reject the foreign tissue, like what happens when you have a transplant. But comb jellies, although they have an immune system, it's very primitive, and apparently it doesn't have the ability to recognize self and non-self.
I just love the guy who thought, I'm going to chop 2 in half and stick them together and see what happens.
Yeah, so then they did some tests, and they proved that the nervous system had all joined together, and the digestive tract had fused as well. And a few weeks after we covered this story, there was another study by a different group of researchers, and they had been able to fuse together dozens of comb jellies into a single entity with a shared nervous system.
So they said, those bastards at Exeter, they only did 2. Let's do dozens. Just stick dozens
together. And they're doing more experiments where they try and fuse different species together. But yeah,
it's like a horror film, the attack of the comb jellies.
So they want to apparently use this to learn how to grow new tissues and organs. And it's hard to see how this applies to humans, but maybe we will learn something from it. But they're amazing animals. A few years ago, we did a story that reported that they have a transient anus. So the anus just forms when they need to defecate and then disappears.
I feel like that's another one of those 2-word put downs that would be quite
transient anus.
Is it a put down though?
It's a useful thing to have, wouldn't it?
Or is it a compliment?
Yeah. Who wouldn't want one,
It sounds very chic.
I'm gonna leave that in the edit now. Well, thanks, Sam. Is there anything perhaps a bit, less stomach churning?
Okay, yeah. So I was cheered by this story about frogs. So you may know that there's this disease, fungal
They didn't
disease.
cut them in half.
No, this is a happy story about the frogs. There's a fungal disease that's been killing loads of frogs, and nearly 100 species of amphibians have gone extinct because of it. And they're particularly vulnerable in winter when they can't raise their body temperature. So a team in Australia, they built these little greenhouses with bricks in them, and the bricks have got holes where the frogs can shelter, and the temperature in there gets up to 40 degrees. The frogs, they can warm themselves up in there, and the fungus struggles to grow above 28 degrees. So they tested this, and it works really well for stopping the frogs from getting the fungus, helping them to recover, or they get the infection, but they can recover from it because their immune system works better. So this is a really good kind of cheap way of saving the frogs, and they get a kind of resistance. So if they have the infection and they've recovered from it because they've had this help from the frog sauna, as they call it, it's like having a vaccination. So it seems that they can survive the infection better.
Frog hospital.
Later on. Yeah. It's nice?
that is a delightful story, actually. I'll take it all back. Thank you, Sam. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to our panelists, Kat, Maddie and Sam. Thanks to the Science Museum for hosting us tonight. Thanks for coming, everyone. As a public service, I should point out that you can still buy a subscription to New Scientist for your friends in time if you need a gift. But look, it's a great present. Go and buy one. It just remains to say happy holidays. Thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks for listening to the podcast over the year. We're back next week. Bye for now. Bye.